Hello and welcome back to Let's Play Jane's Fighters Anthology as we continue on with general aircraft showcases. So going down our list here, gotta hit the right button here, you can see that our next item on the list is the infamous Boeing 747. Now fortunately this is going to be the last commercial aircraft that we have to deal with for a while. As you can see, but it's going to make up for that by being an exceptionally long episode, probably, given the storied history that the 747 has. And I made things a little smoother this time. I did make a custom mission for this. The situation in this one basically just being a transatlantic flight, or what? Must have picked the wrong one, but basically a transatlantic flight. We're picking up from around where, why? Okay, whatever, we'll just do this here. Transatlantic flight. We're picking up from basically, you can see we're starting at the edge of the map, coming in from over Britain. And I was really hoping we could land in Amsterdam, but unfortunately the map cuts off right when it gets to Netherlands, so instead we will be landing in Antwerp, Belgium. So there we go. I don't know why the oh, for Pete's sake. One moment, please. Alright, so that's interesting. Apparently, I don't know if it's the joystick or the USB hub or both, but one of them died. So we're gonna have to troubleshoot that later. In the meantime, we'll be flying this baby on keyboard, so let me just make sure I got those controls set. Alright, I won't have as fine control over the throttle, but I think everything else should be fine. So we're going to course correct here. We can see our next waypoint is 150 miles away, which is fine because we'll be flying at about 400 to 500 knots by the time we get up to speed. So in the meantime, we can start delving into the 747's history. Now, the 747 is a 4-engine jet aircraft initially powered by Pratt & Whitney JT90 turbofan engines, but then re-engined with General Electric CF6 and Rolls-Royce RB211 engines for the original variants. With a 10-abreast economy seating, it typically accommodates 366 passengers in 3 travel classes. It has a pronounced 37.5-degree wing sweep, allowing a Mach 0.85 cruise speed, and its heavy weight is supported by 4 main landing gear legs, each with a 4-wheel bogie. The partial double-deck aircraft was designed with a raised cockpit, so it could be converted to a freighter airplane by installing a front cargo door, as it was initially thought that it would eventually be superseded by supersonic transports. Freighter variants of the 747 remain popular with cargo airliners even today. Boeing introduced the Dash 200 in 1971 with more powerful engines for a heavier maximum takeoff weight of 833,000 pounds from the initial 735,000 pounds, increasing the maximum range from 4,620 to 6,560 nautical miles. It was shortened for the longer range 747 SP in 1976 and the 747-300 followed in 1983 with a stretched upper deck for up to 400 seats in 3 classes. The heavier 747-400 with improved RB211 and CF6 engines, or the new Pratt & Whitney 4000 engine, the successor to the JT90, and a true crew glass cockpit was introduced in 1989 and is the most common variant. After several studies, the stretch 747-8 was launched on November 14, 2005 with new General Electric GEnx engines and was first delivered in October 2011. 747 is the basis for several government and military variants, such as the VC-25, Air Force One, which we've already done in an earlier episode, the E-4 Emergency Airborne Command Post, the shuttle carrier aircraft, and some experimental test beds such as the YAL-1 and Sophia Airborne Observatory. By March of 2022, 1,570 aircraft had been delivered, with 3 747-8Fs remaining on order. Manufacture of the 747 is scheduled to end in 2022 after a 54-year production run. Initial competition came from the smaller tri-jet wide-bodies, the Lockheed L-1011, introduced in 1972, the McDonnell Douglas DC-10, introduced in 1971, and later the MD-11, introduced in 1990. Airbus competed with later variants with the heaviest versions of the A340 until surpassing the 747 in size with the A380, delivered between 2007 and 2021. As of 2020, 61 Boeing 747s have been lost in accidents and incidents, in which a total of 3,722 people have died. So, given their capacity of around 300 to 400, that means only about 10 of those incidents were, on average, loss of life incidents. Just looking at the numbers and averages there. So, some background. In 1963, the United States Air Force started a series of study projects on a very large strategic transport aircraft. Although the C-141 Starlifter was being introduced, officials believed that a much larger, more capable aircraft was needed, especially to carry cargo that would not fit in any existing aircraft. These studies led to initial requirements for the CX Heavy Logistics System, or CX-HLS, in March 1964, for an aircraft with a load capacity of 180,000 pounds and a speed of Mach 0.75, and an unrefueled range of 5,000 nautical miles with a payload of 115,000 pounds. Payload bay had to be 17 feet wide by 13.5 feet high and 100 feet long, with access through doors at the front and rear. The desire to keep the number of engines to 4 required new engine designs with greatly increased power and better fuel economy. In May of 1964, airframe proposals arrived from Boeing, Douglas, General Dynamics, Lockheed, and Martin Marietta. Engine proposals were submitted by General Electric, Curtiss-Wright, and Pratt & Whitney. Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed were given additional study contracts for the airframe, along with General Electric and Pratt & Whitney for the engines. The airframe proposals shared several features. As the CX-HLS needed to be able to be loaded from the front, the door had to be included where the cockpit usually was. All the companies solved this problem by moving the cockpit above the cargo area. Douglas had a small pod just forward and above the wing. Lockheed used a long spine running the length of the aircraft with the wing spar passing through it, while Boeing blended the two with a longer pod that ran from just behind the nose to just behind the wing. In 1965, Lockheed's aircraft design and General Electric's engine design were selected for the new C-5 Galaxy transport, which was the largest military aircraft in the world at the time. Boeing carried the nose door and raised cockpit concepts over to its design of the 747. The 747 was conceived while air travel was increasing in the 1960s. The era of commercial jet transportation, led by the enormous popularity of the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8, had revolutionized long-distance travel. In the early 1960s, even before it lost the CX-HLS contract, Boeing was asked by Juan Trippe, president of Pan Am, one of their most important airline customers, to build a passenger aircraft jet 2.5 times the size of the 707. During this time, airport congestion, worsened by increasing numbers of passengers carried on relatively small aircraft, became a problem that Trippe thought could be addressed by a larger, newer aircraft. In 1965, Joe Suter was transferred from Boeing's 737 development team to manage design studies for the new airliner, already assigned the model number 747. Suter began a design study with Pan Am and other airliners to better understand the requirements. At the time, many thought the 747 would eventually be superseded by supersonic transport aircraft. Boeing responded by designing the 747 so that it could be adapted to easily carry freight and remain in production even as sales of the passenger version declined. In April of 1966, Pan Am ordered 25 Boeing 747-100 aircraft for $525 million. Just trying to Since everything's keyboard now, the arrow keys are what usually rotate around the aircraft, but now they're a secondary control to the numpad, so nope. Turning the numpad off doesn't do anything. Just thought I'd give you guys something different to look at than the cockpit, but apparently that's not going to happen, unfortunately. At least not until we're on the ground and I can tinker with it some more. Alright. Lift failure. And that should about do us. And this order is equivalent to $3.3 billion in 2020 dollars. During the ceremonial 747 contract signing banquet in Seattle on Boeing's 50th anniversary, Juan Trippe predicted that the 747 would be a great weapon for peace, competing with intercontinental missiles for mankind's destiny. As a launch customer, and because of its early involvement before placing a formal order, Pan Am was able to influence the design and development of the 747 to an extent unmatched by a single airline before or since. Ultimately, the high-winged CX-HLS Boeing design was not used for the 747, although technologies developed for their bid had an influence. The original design included a full-length double-deck fuselage with 8 across seating and 2 aisles on the lower deck and 7 across seating and 2 aisles on the upper deck. However, concern over evacuation routes and limited cargo carrying capacity caused this idea to be scrapped in early 1966 in favor of a wider single-deck design. The cockpit was therefore placed on a shortened upper deck so that a freight loading door could be included in the nose cone. This design feature produced the 747's distinctive hump. In early models, what to do with the small space in the pod behind the cockpit was not clear, and this was initially specified as a lounge area with no permanent seating. Different configuration that had been considered to keep the flight deck out of the way for freight loading had the pilots below the passengers and was dubbed the anteater. One of the principal technologies that enabled an aircraft as large as the 747 to be drawn up was the high bypass turbofan engine. This engine technology was thought to be capable of delivering double the power of the earlier turbojets while consuming 1/3 less fuel. General Electric had pioneered the concept but was committed to developing the engine for the C-5 Galaxy and did not enter the commercial market until later. Pratt & Whitney was also working on the same principle, and by late 1966, Boeing, Pan Am, and Pratt & Whitney agreed to develop a new engine designated the JT9D to power the 747. The project was designed with a new methodology called fault tree analysis, which allowed the effects of a failure of a single part to be studied to determine its impact on other systems. To address concerns about safety and flyability, the 747's design included structural redundancy, redundant hydraulic systems, quadruple main landing gear, and dual control surfaces. Additionally, some of the most advanced high-lift devices used in the industry were included in the new design to allow it to operate from existing airports. These included Kruger flaps, running almost the entire length of the wing's leading edge, as well as complex 3-part slotted flaps along the trailing edge of the wing. The wing's complex 3-part flaps increase wing area by 21% and lift by 90% when fully deployed compared to their non-deployed configuration. Boeing agreed to deliver the first 747 to Pan Am by the end of 1969. The delivery date left 28 months to design the aircraft, which was 2/3 of the normal time. The schedule was so fast-paced that the people who worked on it were given the nickname the Incredibles. Developing the aircraft was such a technical and financial challenge that management was said to have bet the company when it started the project. As Boeing did not have a plant large enough to assemble the giant airliner, they chose to build a new plant. The company considered locations in about 50 cities and eventually decided to build the new plant some 30 miles north of Seattle on a site adjoining a military base at Payne Field near Everett, Washington. It bought the 780-acre site in June of 1966. Developing the 747 had been a major challenge, and building its assembly plant was also a huge undertaking. Boeing President William M. Allen asked Malcolm T. Stamper, then head of the company's turbine division, to oversee construction of the Everett factory and to start production of the 747. To level the site, more than 4 million cubic yards of earth had to be moved. Time was so short that the 747's full-scale mock-up was built before the factory roof above it was finished. The plant is the largest building by volume ever built and has been substantially expanded several times to permit construction of other models of Boeing's wide-body commercial jets. Before the first 747 was fully assembled, testing began on many components and systems. More important tests involved the evacuation of 560 volunteers from a cabin mock-up via the aircraft's emergency chutes. The first full-scale evacuation took 2.5 minutes instead of the maximum of 90 seconds mandated by the Federal Aviation Administration, and several volunteers were injured. Subsequent test evacuations achieved the 90-second goal but caused more injuries. Most problematic was evacuation from the aircraft's upper deck. Instead of using a conventional slide, volunteer passengers escaped by using a harness attached to a reel. Tests also involved taxiing such a large aircraft, and Boeing built an unusual training device known as Waddell's Wagon, named for a 747 test pilot, Jack Waddell, that consisted of a mock-up cockpit mounted on the roof of a truck. While the first 747s were still being built, the device allowed pilots to practice taxi maneuvers from a high upper deck position. In 1968, the program cost was $1 billion, which is equivalent to about $5.8 billion in 2020 US dollars. On September 30th, 1968, the first 747 was rolled out of the Everett Assembly Building before the world's press and representatives of the 26 airlines that had ordered the airline. Over the following months, preparations were made for the first flight, which took place on February 9, 1969, with test pilots Jack Waddell and Brian Weigel at the controls and Jess Wellick at the flight engineer station. Despite a minor problem with one of the flaps, the flight confirmed that the 747 handled extremely well. The 747 was found to be largely immune to Dutch roll, phenomena that had been a major hazard to the early swept-wing jets. During later stages of the flight test program, flutter testing showed that the wings suffered oscillation under certain conditions. This difficulty was partly solved by reducing the stiffness of some wing components. However, a particularly severe high-speed flutter problem was solved only by inserting the depleted uranium counterweights as ballast in the outboard engine nacelles of early 747s. This measure caused anxiety when these aircraft crashed. For example, El Al Flight 1862 at Amsterdam in 1922 with 622 pounds of uranium in the tailplane. The flight test program was hampered by problems with the 747's JT-90 engines. Difficulties included engine stalls caused by rapid throttle movements and distortion of the turbine casings after a short period of service. The problems delayed 747 deliveries for several months. Up to 20 aircraft at the Everett plant were stranded while awaiting engine installation. The program was further delayed when one of the 5 test aircraft suffered serious damage during a landing attack at Renton Municipal Airport, the site of Boeing's Renton factory. The incident happened on December 13, 1969, when a test aircraft was flown to Renton to have the test equipment removed and a cabin installed. Pilot Ralph C. Coakley undershot the airport's short runway, and the 747's right outer landing gear was torn off and 2 engine nacelles were damaged. However, these difficulties did not prevent Boeing from taking a test aircraft to the 28th Paris Air Show in mid-1969, where it was displayed to the public for the first time. 747 received its FAA airworthiness certificate in December 1969, clearing it for introduction into service. The huge cost of developing the 747 and building the Everett factory meant that Boeing had to borrow heavily from a banking syndicate. During the final months before delivery of the first aircraft, the company had to repeatedly request additional funds to complete the project. Had this been refused, Boeing's survival would have been threatened. The firm's debt exceeded $2 billion, with the $1.2 billion owed to banks setting a record for all companies. Allen later said, "It was really too large a project for us." Ultimately, the gamble succeeded, and Boeing held a monopoly in very large passenger aircraft production for many years. On January 15, 1970, First Lady of the United States Pat Nixon christened Pan Am's first 747 at Dulles International Airport. later Washington Dulles International Airport, in the presence of Pan Am Chairman Najib Halabi. Instead of champagne, red, white, and blue water was sprayed on the aircraft. 747 entered service on January 22, 1970, on Pan Am's New York-London route. The flight had been planned for the evening of January 21st, but engine overheating made the original aircraft unusable. Finding a substitute delayed the flight by more than 6 hours to the following day when Clipper Victor was used. The 747 enjoyed a fairly smooth introduction to service, overcoming concerns that some airports would not be able to accommodate an aircraft that large. Although technical problems occurred, they were relatively minor and quickly solved. After the aircraft's introduction with Pan Am, other airlines that had bought the 747 to stay competitive began to put their own 747s into service. Boeing estimated that half of the early 747 sales were to airlines desiring the aircraft's long range rather than its payload capacity. While the 747 had the lowest potential operating cost per seat, this could only be achieved when the aircraft was fully loaded. Cost per seat increased rapidly as occupancy declined. A moderately loaded 747, one with only 70% of its seats occupied, used more than 95% of the fuel needed to buy a fully occupied 747. Nonetheless, many flight carriers purchased the 747 due to its prestige, even if it made no sense economically to operate. During the 1970s and 1980s, over 30 regularly scheduled 747s could often be seen at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The recession of 1969 to 1970, despite having been characterized as relatively mild, greatly affected Boeing. For the year and a half after September 1970, it only sold two 747s in the world, both to Irish flag carrier Aer Lingus. No 747s were sold to any American carrier for almost 3 years. When economic problems in the U.S. and other countries after the 1973 oil crisis led to reduced passenger traffic, several airlines found they did not have enough passengers to fly the 747 economically, and they replaced them with the smaller and recently introduced McDonnell Douglas DC-10 and Lockheed L-1011 TriStar Tri-Jet widebodies, and later the 767 and A300 A310 twin jets. Having tried replacing coach seats on its 747s with piano bars in an attempt to attract more customers, American Airlines eventually relegated its 747s to cargo service, and in 1983 exchanged them with Pan Am for a smaller aircraft. Delta Airlines also removed its 747s from service after several years. Later, Delta acquired 747s again in 2008 as part of its merger with Northwest Airlines, although it retired the Boeing 747-400 fleet in December of 2017. International flights bypassing traditional hub airports and landing at smaller cities became more common throughout the 1980s, thus eroding the 747's original market. Many international carriers continued to use the 747 on Pacific routes. In Japan, 747s on domestic routes were configured to carry nearly the maximum passenger capacity. After the initial 747-100, Boeing developed the -100B, a higher maximum takeoff weight variant, and the -100 short range with higher passenger capacity. Increased maximum takeoff weight allows aircraft to carry more fuel and have longer range, and the -200 model followed in 1971, featuring more powerful engines and a higher max takeoff weight. Passenger freighter and combination passenger freighters of the -200 were produced, as well as the shortened 747 SP, or Special Performance, with a longer range, was also developed and entered service in 1976. The 747 line was further developed with the launch of the 747-300 on June 11, 1980, followed by interest from Swiss Air a month later and the go-ahead for the project. 300 series resulted from Boeing studies to increase the seating capacity of the 747, during which modifications such as fuselage plugs and extending the upper deck over the entire length of the fuselage were projected. The first 747-300, completed in 1983, included a stretched upper deck, increased cruise speed, and increased seating capacity. The S300 variant was previously designated the 747 SUD for stretched upper deck, then 747-200 SUD, followed by 747 EUD, before the 747-300 designation was used. Passenger short-range and combination freighter passenger versions of the 300 series were all produced as well. In 1985, development of the longer-range 747-400 began. The variant had a new glass cockpit, which allowed for a cockpit crew of 2 instead of 3, new engines, lighter construction materials, and a redesigned interior. Development costs soared, and production delays occurred as new technologies were incorporated at the request of airlines. Insufficient workforce experience and reliance on overtime contributed to early production problems on the 747-400, which finally entered service in 1989. Oops, I way overshot what I was trying to do here. Alright, let's line this up. There we go. So we're pretty much on the final leg of our journey and starting our descent into Antwerp. In 1991, a record-breaking 1,087 passengers were flown in the 747 during a covert operation to airlift Ethiopian Jews to Israel. Generally, the 747-400 held between 416 and 524 passengers. 747 remained the heaviest commercial aircraft in regular service until the debut of the Antonov AN-124 Jerusalem in 1982. Variants of the 747-400 surpassed the AN-124's weight in 2000. The Antonov AN-225 Miria cargo transport, which debuted in 1988, remains the world's largest aircraft by several measures. And one aircraft had been completed and was in service until 2022 when it was destroyed by Russians during the initial invasion of Ukraine when they captured Hostomel Airport. I forget how to pronounce it. But basically Antonov had a airfield northwest of Kyiv, I think. And during the initial Russian attempt to seize that airport as a means of securing an air bridge into Ukraine, they torched the aircraft. The scale composite Stratolaunch is currently the largest aircraft by wingspan. Since the arrival of the 747-400, several stretching schemes for the 747 have been proposed. Boeing announced the larger 747-500X and 600X preliminary designs in 1996. The new variants would have cost more than $5 billion to develop, and interest was not sufficient to launch the program. In 2000, Boeing offered the more modest 747X and 747X stretch derivatives as alternatives to the Airbus A3XX. However, the 747X family was unable to attract enough interest to enter production. A year later, Boeing switched from the 747X studies to pursue the Sonic Cruiser, and after the Sonic Cruiser program was put on hold, the 787 Dreamliner. Some of the ideas developed for the 747X were used on the 747-400ER, a longer-range variant of the 747-400. After several variants were proposed but later abandoned, some industry observers became skeptical of new aircraft proposals from Boeing. However, in early 2004, Boeing announced tentative plans for the 747 Advanced that were eventually adopted. Similar in nature to the 747X and stretched 747 Advanced used technology from the 787 to modernize the design aimed at systems. The 747 remained the largest passenger airliner in service until the Airbus A380 began airline service in 2007. On November 14, 2005, Boeing announced that it was launching the 747 Advanced as the Boeing 747-8. The last 747-400s were completed in 2009. As of 2011, most orders of the 747-8 have been for the freighter variant. On February 8, 2010, the 747-8 freighter made its maiden flight. The first delivery of the 747-8 intercontinental passenger variant was delivered to Lufthansa on May 5, 2012. The 1,500th Boeing 747 was delivered in June 2014 to Lufthansa. In January of 2016, Boeing stated it was reducing the 747-8 production to 6 a year beginning in September 2016, incurring a $569 million post-tax charge after its fourth quarter 2015 profits. At the end of 2015, the company had 20 orders outstanding. On January 29, 2016, Boeing announced that it had begun preliminary work on the modifications to a commercial 747-8 for the next Air Force One presidential aircraft, expected to be operational by 2020. On July 12, 2016, Boeing announced that it had finalized an order from Volga Dnepr Group for 20 747-8 freighters valued at $7.58 billion at list prices. 4 aircraft were delivered beginning in 2012. Volga Dnepr Group is the parent of 3 major Russian air freight carriers: Volga Dnepr Airlines, Airbridge Cargo Airlines, and Atran Airlines. The new 747-8 freighters will replace Airbridge Cargo's current 747-400 aircraft, expand the airline's fleet, and will be acquired through a mix of direct purchases and leasing over the next 6 years. On July 27, 2016, in its quarterly report to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Boeing discussed the potential termination of 747 production due to insufficient demand and market for the aircraft. With a firm order backlog of 21 aircraft and a production rate of 6 per year, program accounting has been reduced to 1,555 aircraft, and the 747 line could be closed in the third quarter of 2019. In October 2016, UPS Airlines ordered 14 -8Fs to add capacity along with 14 options, which it took in February 2018 to increase the total to 28 -8Fs on order.
Inbound to waypoint Charlie, bearing 118.
And we just gotta line up with the next phase of our descent here. Go for a more mild descent now. The backlog then stood at 25 aircraft, though several of these orders are from airlines that no longer intend to take delivery. On July 2nd, 2020, it was reported that Boeing planned to end 747 production in 2022 upon delivery of the remaining jets on order to UPS and the Volga Dnepr Group due to low demand. On July 29, 2020, Boeing confirmed that the final 747 would be delivered in 2022 as a result of current market dynamics and outlook stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, according to CEO David Callahan. As of January 12, 2021, Boeing has delivered the final 4 747s to Atlas Air in 2022. As far as its design goes, the Boeing 747 is a large, wide-body airliner with 4 wing-mounted engines. Its wings have a high sweep angle of 37.5 degrees for a fast, efficient cruise speed of Mach 0.84 to 0.88, depending on the variant. The sweep also reduces the wingspan, allowing the 747 to use existing hangars. Its seating capacity is over 366 with a 343 seat arrangement in economy class and a 232 layout in first class on the main deck. The upper deck has a 3 seat arrangement in economy class and a 2-2 layout in first class. Raised above the main deck, the cockpit creates a hump. This raised cockpit allows front loading of the cargo on freight variants. The upper deck behind the cockpit provides space for a lounge and/or extra seating. The stretched upper deck became available as an alternative on the 747-100B variant and later as standard beginning on the 747-300. The upper deck was stretched more in the 747-8. The 747 cockpit roof section also has an escape hatch from which crew can exit during the events of an emergency if they cannot do so through the cabin.
Proceed to waypoint Delta, bearing 1, descend to Angel 0.
The 747's maximum takeoff weight ranges from 735,000 pounds for the Dash 100 to 970,000 pounds for the Dash 8. Its range has increased from 5,300 nautical miles on the Dash 100 to 8,000 nautical miles on the Dash 8i. The 747 has redundant structures along with 4 redundant hydraulic systems and 4 main landing gears, each with 4 wheels. These provide a good spread of support on the ground and safety in case of tire blowouts. The main gear are redundant so that the landing can be performed on 2 opposing landing gears if the others are not functioning properly. The 747 also has split control surfaces and was designed with sophisticated triple slotted flaps that minimize landing speeds and allow the 747 to use standard ground length runways. Or standard length runways. Alright, so We are below 5,000 feet now and lining up on final approach. There's the airport. It looks like we're coming in a little cockeyed. So I'm going to change our heading to 270 to try to line that up a little better. Let's see, is it in range for... Right. That's getting annoying real fast. Let's see, yeah, with its... I actually don't know how to configure it when set to keyboard controls. There we go. So yeah, we'll switch to 270. Until we're lined up, and then we will come in for the landing. There we go. There's an actual... What's that for now? Actual decent shot of the aircraft, and you can see the distinctive hump here that they're talking about. So this is likely one of the 100 aircraft that had a shorter hump, because I know the 300, 400, and 8 aircraft, that hump would extend further in. Alright, it is time to lower our flap and landing gear. And unfortunately, playing with the throttle is going to be a bitch, but you can see the we aren't deploying the full amount of flaps as the text has described, that they're full across the wing to increase lift. I'm curious how well they have that simulated here. Let's see, brakes. None visible. Okay. Anyways, for transportation of spare engines, the 747 can accommodate a non-functioning fifth pod engine under the aircraft's port wing between the inner functioning engine and the fuselage. The fifth engine mount is also used by Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 program to carry an orbital class rocket to cruise altitude where it is deployed. Oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that. I'm surprised they didn't also make it possible to carry one on the starboard wing as well, but that could be potentially due to whatchamacallit, weight limit restrictions. There we go, coming in for landing. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 landing supports with the on the center of the fuselage with the 4 landing gear as described. I did not mean to cancel throttle there. It looks like now our descent is such that we can increase our throttle to reduce descent. I'm actually going to have to do that a lot. Because we are losing altitude a little too rapidly for my taste. We gotta line up a little better. There we go. You can see at full throttle we're just now starting to not descend. Or no, we're still descending. There we go. Close enough. And considering I'm working with a completely digital throttle right now, I'm gonna say that's not terribly bad. So here we are at Antwerp. I really wish I could look around. I will say it's nice having the rudder back again, though, but... And we will taxi on over to the... Let's see, can we use... Yeah, that's good enough. Perfect. Beautiful. Very beautiful aircraft, and one that I'm sad to see go. But I just understand that it's... I understand it's not as efficient to operate these days, especially when two-engine aircraft can carry, you know, most of the passengers at pretty much the same range. So some of the other variants that weren't covered in the main body of the text, obviously you have the VC-25, the E-4B, and the L-1, which is the famous Boeing 747 with the laser. You have the shuttle carrier aircraft, of which two were modified, one from a 747-100, one from a 747-100SR. The C-33 was a proposed U.S. military version of 747-400F intended to augment the C-17 fleet, but the plan was canceled in favor of additional C-17s, which makes sense. I mean, why operate two aircraft when you can just operate one? Because, you know, operating two aircraft, that's going to make logistics more difficult because now you got different parts and such, whereas operating one, you just need to keep a network of one set of parts. I'm going to increase throttle a little here. We're a little slow. Full taxi, and I'm worried that even at 25% thrust, we're going to come to a stop. The KC-33A was a proposed 747 adapted as an aerial refueling tanker that was bid against the DC-1030 during the 1970s advanced cargo transport aircraft that produced the KC-10A extender, so it lost that one. There was... Oh no. Am I going to make it? I am. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately we aren't quite turning on a dime here anymore. The 747-100 tanker was, before the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Iran bought four 747-100 aircraft with air refueling boom conversions to support its fleet of F-4 Phantoms. And there is a report of Iranians using a 747 tanker in the H-3 airstrike during the Iran-Iraq War. It is unknown whether these aircraft remain useful as tankers. I think they do. Iran's shown a pretty good capacity of keeping their stuff running despite the lack of U.S. support. Thrust reversers, go! Alright, and we are right up in there. There we go. A little too close, so we can't see our... Well, actually I might be able to change that. Nope. If I could move my camera... Oh well. What a mission to not be able to move the camera, though. Like, the one that would make it worthwhile. Anyways, the 747 CMCA, which was a cruise missile carrier aircraft, was considered by the U.S. Air Force during the development of the B-1 Lancer strategic bomber, and it would have been equipped with between 50 and 100 AGM-86 air-launched cruise missiles on rotary launchers. This plane was abandoned in favor of more conventional strategic bombers. The 747 AAC, a Boeing study under contract from the Air Force for an airborne aircraft carrier for up to 10 Boeing Model 985-121 microfighters with the ability to launch, retrieve, rearm, and refuel. Boeing believed that the scheme would be able to deliver a flexible and fast carrier platform with global reach, particularly where other bases were not available. Modified versions of the 747-200 and the Lockheed C-5A were considered as the base aircraft. Concept, which included a complementary 747 AWACS version with two reconnaissance microfighters, was considered technically feasible in 1973, which is amazing. Obviously, that never came to fruition. There's the Evergreen 747 Supertanker, a Boeing 747-200 modified as an aerial application platform for firefighting using 20,000 U.S. gallons of firefighting chemicals. The Sophia aircraft that was mentioned is a former Pan Am Boeing 747 SP modified to carry a large infrared sensitive telescope in a joint venture of NASA and DLR. High altitudes are needed for infrared astronomy to rise above infrared absorbing water vapor in the atmosphere. and a number of various other governments used the 747 as VIP transport, including Brunei, India, Iran, Japan, Kuwait, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Several Boeing 747-8s have been ordered by Boeing Business Jet for conversion to VIP transports for several unidentified customers. And other versions of the 747 that didn't make it to production include the 747 Tri-Jet, which would have been a shorter 747 with 3 engines to compete against the likes of the L-1011 and DC-10. The 747-500, as discussed earlier, the 747 ASP, or Advanced Short Body, which would have been a response to the A340 and MD-11, which basically would have been a shortened 400. Then there were, the 500X, 600X, and 700X projects that were mentioned. The X and X stretch projects that were previously mentioned. And finally, the 4XQLR, which would have been a quiet long-range stretch version with improvements to boost efficiency and reduce noise. And while this version didn't move to production, a lot of the technologies that were developed were eventually used in the 747-8 in 2005. Following its debut, the 747 rapidly achieved iconic status. The aircraft entered the cultural lexicon as the original jumbo jet, a term coined by aviation media to describe its size, and was also nicknamed the Queen of the Skies. Test pilot David P. Davies described it as the most impressive aeroplane with a number of exceptionally fine qualities, and praised its flight control system as truly outstanding because of its redundancy. Appearing in over 300 film productions, the 747 is one of the most widely depicted civilian aircraft and is considered by many as one of the most iconic in film history. It has appeared in film productions such as Airport 1975 and Airport 77 disaster films, Air Force One, Die Hard 2, and Executive Decision. So that is a slightly brief version of the Boeing 747's history. Obviously, I could probably go on for another hour easily, but I abridged it somewhat, so this wouldn't be too terribly long of an episode. So now that our quote-unquote passengers are debarking at the quote-unquote terminal here, let's head out. Alright, so you can see that trip was made in about 45 minutes, which I think in real life that would probably be closer to an hour or two, because of how dimensions are different. I actually have flown on 747s a couple of times. Once on a cross-country trip from where I live in the Midwest out to California when I was a kid on, I believe, a 747-100B. And then when I lived in Germany for a year, I flew out on, I believe, was a KLM. Actually, let's see what KLM actually operates. That'll probably be better than trying to remember. But I think it was a 747-400. And boy, were we packed in like sardines. I remember on the flight back, it was a long flight too. God, it was like at least 8 or 9 hours flying from the U.S. to Amsterdam, and obviously there you have the benefit of the trade winds or whatever. On the way back, for you don't have that benefit, it's closer to like a 10 or 11 hour trip. But let's see. KLM. There we go. Yeah, either a 200B or a 400, it looks like. But yeah, on the way back, actually. And this isn't a knock against the 747. I mean, it's a great aircraft. It's just configured for freaking maximum occupancy. But I fell asleep, well, half asleep in such a way that my nerve in like my wrist was being pinched, and so for like 3 months afterwards, my hand was like half numb. But it got better eventually, thankfully. Didn't have to see a doctor for that one, fortunately. But yeah, it's a great aircraft. I'm sad to see it go, but unfortunately, it's just not as economical these days. There actually was a time even when cross-oceanic flights, I believe, were required to have 4 engines because they wanted the extra redundancy in case of engine failure. But obviously nowadays, they, with the Dreamliner and stuff, they can do it with 2 engines just fine in the 787 and the 777. But I think that'll cover it up for today. Next time, we'll be going back to military aircraft for a while instead of doing what should really be done in the latest Microsoft Flight Simulator. But in any case, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for next time, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you then.